Welcome to the Insurance Leaders Lab podcast, designed for insurance professionals and leaders seeking inspiration, bold ideas, and actionable strategies. Our guests are remarkable individuals from various insurance industry sectors, and our host, Nina Shepard, has been an insurance leader for over 3 decades. Together, we explore what it truly means to be a bold and impactful leader and find personal fulfillment in the ever-evolving insurance world. New episodes are released bi-weekly on Thursdays. Be sure to follow the podcast on your platform of choice to receive alerts when new episodes drop. Bold leaders, frank dialogue, actionable strategies. Welcome to the Insurance Leaders Lab. Good morning and welcome back to the Insurance Leaders Lab podcast. I'm very excited to welcome our amazing guest, Tim Parenti. Tim is a Senior VP of Sales for the First Insurance Funding Wintrust Company. Tim started his career at Allstate Insurance as a Senior Manager, overseeing operations, customer services, information technology, and training. He later led one of the world's top consulting and training organizations with operations in over 50 countries. During that time, not only did Tim become the second highest producer in the organization's history, but he also became involved in the research, design, and facilitation of training programs. During his 20-plus year career, over 500,000 people in roles such as sales professionals, mid-level managers, and CEOs have benefited from his training. Whether it's sales, leadership, change management, strategic planning, customer service, or communication, Tim's strengths lie in helping businesses tackle the real challenges they face daily. Good morning, Tim. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Nina. I appreciate that awesome introduction. I'd love to meet the person who wrote that.
Here I am. Tim, I am sure you realize that your knowledge and experience are truly exceptional. You've had quite a journey, outstanding sales results, successful operational career, and working with thousands of insurance professionals and leaders, helping them to overcome their challenges. This is an invaluable experience. I'd love to hear some highlights from your professional career. What have you learned about insurance and its people through your work with them?
Well, it's kind of a trick question, but I'll try to answer it anyway. One of the benefits I had in my prior career was the fact that I worked with a variety of different industries. I worked with large hospitals, large construction firms, large manufacturing companies, retail. So I essentially worked with every industry known to man. And what I found, I don't know if it was interesting or just kind of a unique connection, that in the insurance space, the challenges really aren't any different. The challenges that businesses face are oftentimes the same thing, other than you're going to have unique technology challenges from industry to industry that are going to vary. At the end of the day, when it comes to leadership, the challenges, the goals, and the desired traits to be successful are still the same, irrespective of the industry.
That is what I'm seeing as well. With that said, insurance is a very special industry. And you worked in insurance for how long for now? Like 20 years?
Well, total now about 23, 24 all in. And yes, the insurance industry does have its own space. Obviously, companies around the world are involved in the M&A space. But the insurance industry, as you know, in the last probably 6 to 7 years has really seen a heavy load of M&A activity. And so that's unique to this industry because you have a lot of smaller shops. When I say smaller shops, anywhere from 10 to even 150 employees, people are recognizing the value of an insurance brokerage firm, and they want to get in on the action. So that's been a very different compared to other industries around the country.
This is true. And what are those specific challenges when you're thinking about M&As?
Now, those challenges are not unique to the insurance space. Whenever you have a lot of M&A, the first thing that's put to the test is the culture. Your decision to want to become acquired or become a partner with one organization may be determined based off of cultural fit. But even though you've done all your homework and your due diligence, you can't ignore the fact that even if it was the best fit of all the choices that were out there, there's still going to be some growing pains as it relates to when the organizations merge together. That's probably one of the biggest challenges because it affects culture. You're essentially taking the culture of one organization, let's say the acquiring organization, and now you're trying to blend it in with the culture of the organization that they're joining with. And it's not always that easy because when you think about the actual definition of the word culture, it boils down to a simple sentence, and that is it's our way of doing things. That's what culture is. The culture in your home with your family is the way your family does things. Even though it's very good, my culture, which is also very good, and how I want to raise my children and how we want to act around the home is equally good. So they're both good, but they're not necessarily the same. So the blending of the culture becomes a challenge.
I'm sure you work with a number of high level executives in that space who are dealing with that challenge. Let's look into that from the mistakes point of view. What are the worst mistakes that you've seen? I think statistics says about 70% of these activities are actually failing. So there are many mistakes that are being done. What are the most typical in your opinion?
Well, I don't want to offend anybody, so I'm not going to mention any mistakes, and I'm
Oh,
certainly not going to mention any organizations. But
no.
I would like to pivot to a different uh, perspective, and that is what are the ones that are successful? What are they doing? And that's really I think the direction we should go. And I think the what I've seen is they're very very cognizant of the existing leadership that they're taking over and making sure they're part of it, where they don't forcefully pull them out. There's no power play going on. They really rely on them to bring their team over, not just physically, but also emotionally and spiritually. So they engage in that senior management team that they acquired, and they can let them to continue to stay the course, maintain their role, maintain their credibility, maintain their degree of activism, for lack of better word, to keep their team still engaged with the new organization. They don't discount them. Essentially, what is what I'm saying.
Okay.
I also think that they're very honest. The acquiring group, let's say, is very honest. They basically say, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be tough. They don't have their head in the sand. They're very forthcoming about it. And I think there's relief amongst everyone that say, okay, yeah, at least you acknowledge that it's not going to be easy, but we're all in this together. Let's make the most of it. So I like the fact that they're very transparent in that respect.
Hmm. Okay. Tim, in your work, do you work a lot with that type of situations? Ace?
No, not really directly, but indirectly quite a bit. In fact, I was with an organization just recently, and I heard somebody say something that I thought was very profound, addressing a group that was going to be part of an acquisition. And they said, "Look, I know you're anxious about this acquisition, but and when we were going into the unknown, but you know the alternative to what we were thinking of doing was also going to be the unknown. So no matter what, life is full of the unknown. So rather than rejecting it, let's embrace it together and let's figure it out." And I thought that was really smart because, people just, and well, I'm sure we'll get into this, people generally don't like change, right? But you have to ask yourself, are they fighting the change itself, what it is that's being done, or the fact that they just have to be doing something differently? And there's a distinction. So the activity I like to use all the time, and I don't remember if we've done this before, but if you take your hands right now and you clasp them together, like you're going to fold your hands, you can go ahead and do that if you want. And look where your thumb is, right? One of your thumbs is probably over the other thumb. Well, if you take your hands apart and reclasp them and put the other thumb on top, right?
That's a good one. Yeah.
It's not wrong. It's just different. And I think that's what great organizations do. Just because what we're doing may be different, let's not automatically make the leap that what we're doing is wrong.
Yeah. That is a very important point that you're making. I like the distinction between fighting the change per se versus a different approach. It still takes time, and it's not only on the leadership level, it's more on the employee implementation level. I can say that as an operations person. The implementation is the hardest, and there is a reason why Peter Drucker said once, famous phrase, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Right. So it's how we do things here around here is what is very challenging and difficult to work with.
Mhm.
Any specific kind of ideas? You said already, well, be open, be transparent, engage people early on. What else comes to your mind?
Well, just recognizing that whenever there's a change, what you're really asking people to change are their habits. And so you have to be incredibly patient. Talk to anybody who's ever tried to quit smoking, even though on the box it says, you and I have both been to Europe before. If you look at cigarette packages in other countries, it doesn't say may cause problem here, it might. No, it says, if you smoke these, you will die.
That's
But
true.
yet, even though it says you will die, people continue to smoke. Now, if that's not enough incentive to quit, then what is? And the whole point of it is they know it's a good idea to quit smoking, but they can't because it is now a habit. And I think great leaders have to really take that step back and say, okay, it's not so easy for them to flip a switch and automatically to buy in what we're doing. It's a habit. And with any habit that needs to be changed, we have to be patient with it. We have to coach it. We have to nurture it. We have to reinforce it. And I think that's what the great leaders do. They continue to recognize and say, hey, I know this isn't easy. We knew it wasn't going to be easy. But at the end of the day, the juice is going to be worth the squeeze.
Like that expression. Okay, thank you. Tim, we jumped into the meat of the conversation about A's and changes and leadership challenges. And I failed to ask you about what exactly are you doing as part of your work with leaders, and how does that look for you at the moment?
Yeah, we'd like to go into organizations where they ask for us. We don't insist on it, and we just become a resource. So First Insurance Funding, as you know, Nina, we're a premium finance company, but we're also pretty smart enough to realize that if we do have resources available to help our clients beyond the scope of premium financing, a good partnership would suggest we should go ahead and offer that to them, and that's exactly what we do. So when organizations are going through change, whether it's an M&A or any sort of a change, maybe they're going from one computer agency management system to another. So that's internal change that has nothing to do with an M&A. It throws everything up in the air and people become naturally filled with anxiety. So something that we do is we could go in and we could do a session for our clients with two key objectives. In any change, you have two key parties. One are the change agents. Those are the leaders who are responsible for driving the change in the organization, both tactically as well as managing the emotional anxiety of the people that are actually going to be going through the change to get the buy in to stay the course. And the second group that is affected, of course, when there's change are what we call the change targets. Those are the people that we're actually asking to change. You need to change your habits and your behaviors to this new methodology. So, what we've done is we've developed training classes to help both sides, to go in to help the leadership team how to be a good leader through these transitions, things to consider. And at the same time, they give us a forum to address the change targets, those people who are going through the change, to mollify, if you will, to soften them up so they're more open to embracing the change and realizing and recognizing that the voyage is not going to be without its waves, right? It's not going to be without its challenges, and any failures, any missteps, any mistakes, etc. That those are normal. It just happens when you're going through change. They're not going to be viewed as the catalyst for those mistakes. They're going to recognize that, hey, this is just part and parcel of the change. We move on. No one's going to be held accountable, and we dust ourselves off, and we keep going.
Okay. That's really interesting.
And nobody does this, and that's what we try to do. We try to differentiate. Premium finance is a very unique specialty. There's probably 5 or 6 major players in the entire country that do it, and because we are to a degree a commodity, we try to go out there and essentially decommoditize this business by offering services that nobody else really can match.
And I agree. I never heard about anyone else offering that additional service. And this is really big, very important differentiation, especially for insurance agencies, because, to have an expert like you for half of the day of training for our either leadership management team or our employees, that's a big deal. That's definitely is a big deal. Great. You were talking about change and I was okay, well, I think pretty much every single agency owner or agency leader today can think of a large project that is in front of them, whether it's technology or growth or implementing some new products or whatever it is. And everyone could benefit from a little bit of a change management practical tips. So, are you ready to share one or two with us? Like, okay, if I am in the middle of large project implementation, let's talk about technology. That's probably one of those, either changing the systems, agency management system, or maybe implementing some AI, which is at the top of minds for everybody. And there are some positives, and there is a lot of fear behind the AI implementation for employees. So, give us some tips how to deal with that.
Well, a tactic I enjoy doing is I like to take people down a trip called memory lane. You've heard that saying before, and go back to past technologies that we rejected. Right? Oh, I'm not going to do online banking. It's too complicated. Now we use online banking all the time. There's so much technology that we rejected in the past that you think about it today and we ask ourselves, well, gee, what would I be doing without it? And give you a good example. In 1992, a famous person once said, quote, the internet, I'm not interested, exclamation point. Do you want to guess who that person was?
No, I have no idea, actually.
It was Bill Gates.
Wow. Really?
Bill Gates. And so there's an example. And if you just let people know that, gee, think back to all of these things that we used to fight and reject, they've all become part of our normal part of our life. So the mentality I try to get people to try to embrace, first off, is with any change, just don't expect a lot from yourself out of the gate. For myself personally, whenever a new change is introduced, before I just freak out, I just say to myself, okay, I know my own pathology. I know for the first 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to hate it because I'm just changing habits. And then after a while, I'll start to get a little bit more comfortable with it. I'll still kind of hate it. And then I'll start to realize, okay, it's not as bad as I really thought. And then now it's a month or two later, and I'm using it as if I used it for the last 10 years. It's just there's a term for it. It's called historical inevitability.
Oh, wow.
Historical inevitability.
Okay.
And all I do is I know that during my entire life, I've always gone through that process. And I remind myself, hey, Tim, this is the same thing you thought 5 years ago when X was introduced. Gee, Tim, this is the same thing you thought 9 years ago when Y was introduced. It's part of the pathology. You just realize that this anxiety, this frustration, it's just part of the process. I'm not defective. You're not defective. It's just human nature.
And it's actually great way to approach it. I like it because it's human and we all are humans, and recognizing that you are human and giving yourself a little bit of space to get used to a new thing. You don't have to love it from the day one, but you'll get used to that. That's a good one. The
Yeah.
challenge I think we all are facing nowadays is that it's just too many things are happening at the fantastic speed, right? Too many and too quickly.
But I would challenge you on that a little bit. It is true But what we've learned about human nature is that we have more capacity than we could ever give ourselves credit for. Give you, you hear the old saw. People say we only use 10% of our brain, right? Well, that means there's potential there, right? And unless you push that potential, you'll never know what your true capacity is. A great example, I'll take you back to 1954, if I may, Nina. And for years, people had been trying to break the 4 minute mile, and nobody could break the 4 minute mile. Doctors were recommending against it. Don't do it. You'll have a heart attack. Your lungs will explode. Your legs will fall off until May 1954 in Oxford, England, on a rainy track, a British gentleman by the name of Roger Bannister broke the 4 minute mile. Now, back then, they did not have the social media, so the news didn't travel as fast back then. But when it finally got around the world that this guy from England broke the 4 minute mile, what started to happen soon thereafter? The 4 minute mile was broken over and over and over again. The point being, where was the limitation in breaking the 4 minute mile? Was it physical? Obviously not. It was mental. And so once we get through that mental blockade, if you will, our potential to absorb, to adapt is really infinite, but we got to give it a chance first.
100%. If our listeners will take just this one point, this one story from our conversation today, that is golden. If we open the doors, we have unlimited potential. Awesome. Great.
And that's what
Tim,
I see
yeah.
great leaders doing. This is supposed to be a leadership symposium, if you will. What the great leaders are doing is they're constantly reinforcing the value proposition of, let's say, the change or whatever initiative they're trying to go through. They're talking to their people about how's it going? Yeah, I know it's tough, but hang in there. That's what real leadership is. It's not, well, hey, this is your job. You have to do it. And if you don't like it, we'll get somebody who can, or but just suck it up. And that's not what leadership is. You might get lucky and get the change through, but it's certainly not the most desirable one.
So true. Thank you. Hey, Tim, leadership training and coaching is a very intense work, which requires both physically and intellectually exceptional agility. So, my question to you personally is, how do you maintain proper focus and motivation during your work? What are those tricks that you're willing to share?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I'm embarrassed to tell you, growing up in traditional schooling, I was always the worst student in the class.
I don't believe you.
I was. I never acted up. I was never cross with the teachers. I just didn't get it. And as I got older and I started to speak to a lot of educational psychologists, what they found was that people like me, I guess you could call me defective at that point in time, we don't embrace anything unless we see value in application. My DNA is such that I'm very protective of my bandwidth, what I choose to let in and what I choose to block out. And so my entire life going forward, once I figured out how to learn and I learned how to manage that bandwidth, I learned that I have to be very cognizant of my thinking. So as a result, I have very high emotional intelligence. I'm very realistic and I'm very pragmatic. I'm very good at reading both sides, understanding both sides. So how do I keep going? I always make an effort to look at both sides of the coin. Look at both sides. Do they have an argument? Does this other person have an argument? Do I understand why they might be rejecting this is legitimate? May not look legitimate from my perspective, but it does look legitimate from theirs. If that's the case, then it is legitimate. And so I've learned to never discount people's perspectives or feelings because it's really hard to manage if you don't. And so I'm very empathetic as well. Doesn't mean I validate people's feelings if they're, let's say, wrong or irrational, but I'll always understand, okay, I can at least see where you're coming from, right? And so that's kind of where I'm at. You asked, like, where do I get my validation, my inspiration from? Is I talk to a lot of people and I get to see a lot of different perspectives. And there's a lot of really neat examples of that. I'll share with you one perspective, and I learned it from my son. It's one of my favorite stories. Sometimes we think we know it all, and sometimes we're too practical for our own good. So this is, I think you'll enjoy this story. My son, when he was young, he loved snakes, and we're going to go to Mexico.
Oh,
And
wow.
when we're in Mexico, he asked me, he goes, "Dad, are we going to see snakes?" I'm like, "We might get lucky. There's some snakes. Let's see." So, make a long story short, we're there for a week, no snakes. And as we're driving back to the airport, we had two different cars. We come to a stoplight, and I happen to look down in the middle of the road. In the middle of the road is a dead snake. It got run over by a car. And so my son was in the car behind us, and we drove to the airport. And as we're unpacking, I said to my son, Matt, I said, Matt, I got good news and I got bad news. He goes, all right. He's always the optimist. And I said, the good news is I saw a snake. And he said to me, "Well, where?" I said, "In the middle of the road." And that's the bad news. He was run over. He was dead. And he goes, "Oh my gosh." He says, "Dad, did you take the snake off of the center of the road?" I said, "No, he was dead." He goes, "I know, but did you grab the snake and at least take him off to the side of the road?" I said, "No, Matt, he was dead." He said, "Dad, but why didn't now he's 6 years old at the time." He said, "Dad, why didn't you take that snake and move him off the side of the road?" I finally raised my voice a little bit because I could see I was not getting through to him. I said, "Matt, he was dead. Why take him off the road when he was already dead?" And he said, "Dad, I understand that. But if another animal chooses to go and eat that snake, if you don't take him off the road, that animal could get run over too." Imagine how small I felt
Yeah.
hearing this from him. And that was just a great lesson of, sometimes we don't know what we don't know. Somebody always has a perspective that we hadn't considered. I've carried that really throughout my career. My wife, to this day, she just gets frustrated with me. She always says, Tim, why do you always ask people an opinion about something you already have forged in your own mind or you already know what you're going to do? And I says, because history tells me that there's at some point in time, there's going to be a perspective I hadn't considered, and that's worth it.
Wow. That's a great story. And I think our listeners who are insurance leaders and professionals looking for new ideas and inspiration would be very inspired by that story. Looking for opinions that can give you different perspectives. That's always broadening the horizon for us.
Sure. And Nina, I've always subscribed to the notion that there's no direct correlation between education and intelligence. Actually, I'm walking proof of that. I have there's an old German proverb that says we get old too fast and wise too slow.
I haven't
And
heard this one. Okay.
yeah, where does wisdom come from? Wisdom comes from experience, which is why I always ask people their opinion and always ask their perspective because even though people whether they may not have a PhD, may not have an MBA, may not have a BA, who knows, maybe some of them may not even have a high school degree. Some of them may even speak imperfect English, if you will. But what I found is it doesn't mean they don't have something to offer. It doesn't mean they don't have perspective. And I think
Absolutely.
the biggest disservice we can make, not only to ourselves, but also to them and our organizations, is to not factor those people in. And so I talk to everyone in the company because someone has something of value to offer.
100% agreed. Great. Okay, Tim, as we are approaching the end of our conversation, any other words of wisdom? You did share a lot of wisdom already. Anything else you would like to offer our listeners at this point as a guidance?
Yeah, I don't want to sound preachy and all, but kind of put a bow around some of the things that we talked about. Some six key tenets that I think are really important for leaders. We talked a lot about change. I think great leaders really should never be afraid of changing. Edward de Bono wrote a book one time, and one of the quotes in his book was, "If you never change your mind, why bother having one?" Great leaders have to have the ability to be humble and say, "Hey, I screwed up. We got to do it differently." And I think people will respect them for that as opposed to staying the course because they're stubborn, which would be a quality they wouldn't respect. I think great leaders also do a great job of what I call absorbing shock. they should take the bullets. Sorry to use that illustration in today's world, but they should take the blame for many of the things that are going on and insulate a lot of their people from it, and give them the permission and the latitude to explore further mistakes, if you will, because mistakes are part of the growing process. In fact, I don't know if you know this. Have you ever heard of a product called WD-40?
No?
So WD-40 is a spray that people put on, and it helps loosen up bolts so you can unscrew them. And it
Okay.
helps
No
keeps
wonder I
uh,
never heard about it.
it keeps if you've got a squeaky hinge, you spray it on there. It's just essentially a lubricant. But what a lot of people don't know is what the word WD-40 stands for. WD stands for the word water displacement. The number 40 the number 40 represents how many times it took them to come up with the magic formula. So, what have they essentially done? They are advertising the fact that we made 40 mistakes before we got it right.
Oh, wow.
That's humility. And I think great leaders need to absorb the shock and the challenges and the danger that our people they just need to insulate their teams from all the clutter and the noise that's going on out there. I think great leaders also over communicate. In all the employee surveys I've ever seen, I don't think I've ever heard any frontline employee say, gee, if my management team or my leadership team starts, if they keep over communicating like this, I'm going to need to find another job. I just can't take all this information about what's going on in the organization. Be open with them, be honest, because again, they might come back to you with a perspective you didn't consider. Think before answering. Think before answering. They say that's one of the great qualities of introverts. They think and think and think and think, and then they'll go ahead and answer. And by the way, they always say that some of the best leaders, you look at it statistically, are introverts, but I'll let your audience research that on their own. I think great leaders also need to search, and this is true really for anyone, but search for the right path, not the easy path. The easy path will always be there. The right path is usually the path that's fraught with critics, the ones who are going to tell you why it won't work, why it's the wrong thing to do, why it's going to be too difficult. The great leaders, the great inventors, the great pioneers of this world were the ones who were told it couldn't be done. So I would think that when somebody does tell me it's going to be impossible and it can't be done, then that almost, for me, reaffirms that it probably ought to be the path that I seek. And lastly, um, and this one I hold near and dear to myself, is great leaders should take sacred time for themselves. You cannot energize the team. You can't lead the group without recharging your own batteries from time to time. If not time to time, often. You won't have the mental capacity, you won't have the energy or the strength to do it, not only at your level, but at the level that they require. So that sacred time for yourself to recharge. And I'm not talking about necessarily going out golfing or going on a vacation, but sometimes just sitting in a room and with the lights off and shutting down your devices and just taking time to think. Maybe
And
going for a nice long drive on a nice curvy road just to decompress. So those are the six tenets that I hold dear for myself.
awesome. These are great recommendations. Thank you, Tim. I can see why so many agencies are coming to you and First Insurance Funding to get that additional advice and help in, training their people and having those important discussions with your help. Is there anything else you would like to share before we finish?
Yeah, and again, to try to avoid being preachy, the one thing I would caution leaders out there is where possible, be careful. And this could be controversial. Be careful about employee engagement. Uh, the way organizations are running today because of COVID, there's a lot more people operating virtually. And it's a double-edged sword. In one sense, it allows you to hire people who are in another state but are extremely qualified to fill a void or a niche that you need. So it works for you and it works for them. The danger is, I think, with COVID and people working virtually, is we grew to accept it. And the reason I say that it's dangerous is that there's no substitute when it comes to leadership and teams and culture than employee engagement. And when everybody's virtual and we don't take the time to get people back together, we suffer from that lack of engagement. And that lack of engagement is There's a term for it. It's called disengagement. I mean, would you want to have a team that is disengaged? The answer is no. So I would just encourage people where possible to do as much as you can to re-engage with your teams. Try to get them back to the office as often as you can. There's an interesting study that was done by the Gallup poll. I wrote this down. I wanted to share this with you. And they found between 800 and 900 billion dollars is lost annually as a result of employee disengagement. So it's real, and I understand why some organizations do it. I'm not going to challenge their reasonings for doing that, but I would emphasize that there really is no substitute for employee engagement. And great leaders walk around. What's that old saying? I've got an MBWA, managing by walking around. A great book written many years that talked about that. Walk around, talk to your people, find out what's going on, getting ideas, because at the end of the day, leaders aren't managers. We manage things, we lead people.
Okay, on that wonderful note, Tim, I want to thank you for the great conversation. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you. And I personally found a few great tips that I'm going to be using. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Well, thank you, Nina. And speaking of great leaders, I have to give a shout out to you. Taking this initiative to help develop other leaders and provide this wisdom and insight to others is just a great example of what great leaders do. And so, see, I get to learn wonderful things from you as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks, Tim. Bye.
All right. Bye, Nina.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Insurance Leaders Lab podcast. If you like what you've heard, please like it and leave a review on your preferred podcast platform. If there is anyone else in your circle who can benefit from listening, please share this link with them. Remember, this is a podcast for you, and your opinion matters to me, so if there is any topic you'd like to bring up, please send me a note to nina@ninashepherd.com. I'll see you back in 2 weeks on Thursday morning. Bye for now.